Do you think The Strangers was just a horror movie? A simple home invasion thriller designed to make you check your locks before bed? What if I told you the film wasn't invented, it was excavated? That Bryan Bertino didn't write a screenplay, so much as he assembled fragments of American terror that had been scattered across decades, hoping we'd recognize something we'd been trying to forget? The official story is straightforward enough. A young couple, played by Liv Tyler and Scott Speedman, spend a night in a remote vacation home. 3 masked strangers arrive. They terrorize, they kill. When asked why, one of them delivers a line that has echoed through American nightmares ever since. Because you were home. 4 words. That's all it took to crystallize something that had been lurking in the American psyche since before any of us were born. But here's what the studio didn't tell you. Here's what the director himself has only hinted at in scattered interviews. That line wasn't written, it was remembered. And the events that inspired this film weren't fiction. They were America's unspoken confession about a very specific kind of violence we've never been able to explain. This is the terrifying true story behind The Strangers. To understand where this film came from, we need to travel back to a very specific moment in American history, not to a single crime, but to a fracture, a point where something broke in the relationship between Americans and their homes. The year was 1969. The place was Los Angeles, and the crime was so shocking, so seemingly random, that it fundamentally altered how Americans thought about safety, privacy, and the people who might be watching them from the darkness. On August 8th and 9th, members of the Manson family entered 2 homes in the Los Angeles area. At the first, on Cielo Drive, they murdered 5 people, including the actress Sharon Tate, who was 8.5 months pregnant. The following night, they killed Leno and Rosemary LaBianca in their home in Los Feliz. The victims were bound. They were tortured. Messages were written in blood on the walls. When Susan Atkins, one of the killers, was later asked why they chose Sharon Tate's home, her answer was chillingly mundane. They had been to the house before when a different person lived there. They knew the layout. It was convenient. That's it. That's the reason. Not revenge, not robbery, not any of the motives we tell ourselves explain human violence, just convenience, just proximity, just the fact that these people happened to be home when the killers happened to arrive. Vincent Bugliosi, the prosecutor who convicted Charles Manson, wrote extensively about the psychological impact of these murders on the American public. In his book Helter Skelter, which remains the best-selling true crime book in American history, he documented how the Tate-LaBianca murders shattered what he called the illusion of safety. Before August 1969, most Americans believed that if you locked your doors, if you lived in a nice neighborhood, if you didn't associate with dangerous people, you would be safe. The Manson murders proved that belief was a fantasy. Gun sales in Los Angeles increased dramatically in the weeks following the murders. Guard dog purchases skyrocketed. Home security companies reported unprecedented demand. People stopped hitchhiking. They stopped leaving their doors unlocked. They stopped trusting strangers. This is the first layer of truth behind The Strangers. That line, "because you were home," is a direct echo of the Manson family's motiveless selection of victims. Bryan Bertino has acknowledged this connection in interviews. He has spoken about growing up in the shadow of the Manson murders, about how they represented a specifically American form of terror that had never been adequately explored on film. But the Manson connection is just the beginning. The visual imagery of The Strangers, the specific staging of horror, comes from somewhere else entirely, somewhere that for decades remained officially unsolved. Keddie, California is a small, unincorporated community in Plumas County, nestled in the Sierra Nevada mountains. In 1981, it was home to the Keddie Resort, a collection of small cabins that served as affordable housing for local families. Cabin 28 was rented by Glenna Susan Sharp, known as Sue, a 36-year-old mother who had recently left an abusive marriage and was trying to build a new life for her 5 children. On the night of April 11th, 1981, Sue Sharp was in cabin 28 with her son John, 15, her daughter Tina, 12, and John's friend Dana Wingate, 17. Sue's other children were having a sleepover in the adjacent cabin, just feet away. What happened that night has never been fully explained. On the morning of April 12th, Sue's daughter Sheila returned from the neighboring cabin to find a scene of absolute horror. Her mother, her brother John, and Dana Wingate had been bound with medical tape and electrical cord. They had been beaten with a claw hammer. They had been stabbed repeatedly with a knife and what investigators believe was a pocket knife. The brutality was extreme, the kind that suggested not just murder but rage, frenzy, something that exceeded any rational motive. 12-year-old Tina was missing. Her skull would be found 3 years later in 1984 in a different county. The rest of her remains have never been recovered. Here is what makes the Keddie murders so deeply unsettling. What separates them from other violent crimes and connects them directly to the film that would be made 27 years later. There was no robbery. Nothing was taken from the cabin. The killers didn't know their victims, at least not in any way that has ever been established. They entered a home in the middle of the night and committed acts of extraordinary violence against people who were essentially strangers to them. And perhaps most disturbingly, they stayed. The forensic evidence suggests that the killers remained in cabin 28 for hours after the murders. They didn't flee. They didn't panic. They sat in that cabin with the bodies of their victims, doing things that investigators have never been able to fully explain. Some believe they were destroying evidence. Others believe they were simply savoring what they had done. Meanwhile, Sue Sharp's other children slept in the cabin next door. They heard nothing. They suspected nothing. They woke up the next morning and walked into a nightmare that would define the rest of their lives. Bryan Bertino has never explicitly confirmed that the Keddie murders inspired the strangers, but the visual parallels are impossible to ignore. The remote cabin location, the family bound with electrical cord and tape, the killers who stayed for hours, who seemed to have no motive beyond the act itself, the surviving family members in close proximity who heard nothing. In The Strangers, we watch as Kristen and James are stalked through their isolated vacation home. We watch the masked figures toy with them, appearing and disappearing, making phone calls, playing games. The violence, when it comes, is not immediate. It's prolonged, ritualized, almost leisurely. The killers have all the time in the world. They're not in a hurry. That pattern, the extended presence, the psychological torture preceding physical violence, the absence of any conventional motive, mirrors what investigators believe happened in cabin 28. The Keddie case remained officially unsolved for decades, though in 2016 investigators named 2 suspects, Martin Smart and John Bubed, both of whom lived near the Keddie Resort in 1981. Smart's ex-wife Marilyn came forward that year with information she had kept secret for 35 years, including her claim that Smart had confessed to participating in the murders. Both men were dead by the time they were named, which means there will never be a trial, never be a definitive legal resolution. But here's what we do know. The psychological profile of the Keddie killers, as reconstructed by investigators, matches something the criminologists have been studying for decades. A specific type of offender, a specific pattern of behavior, a specific kind of violence that terrorizes precisely because it defies explanation. Before we go further into the psychology of stranger violence, we need to examine something that often gets overlooked in discussions of The Strangers, the production history of the film itself, because what happened behind the camera reveals just how deeply this material affected everyone who touched it. Bryan Bertino wrote the first draft of The Strangers in 2001, when he was just 23 years old and working as a grip on film sets in Austin, Texas. The script sat in a drawer for years. Bertino has described being almost afraid of it, afraid of what he'd tapped into, afraid of what it said about the world he lived in. When the script finally sold in 2005, it sparked one of the most competitive bidding situations that year for a horror property. Multiple studios wanted it. What they recognized, what made executives willing to pay significant money for a first-time writer's screenplay, was the authenticity. This didn't read like a horror movie. It read like a crime scene report. The production itself was troubled in ways that those involved have only discussed obliquely. The shoot took place in rural South Carolina, in a house that had been modified to allow for the film's complex staging of paranoia and pursuit. Cast and crew members have described an atmosphere of genuine unease on set, a feeling that they weren't making entertainment so much as recreating something that shouldn't be recreated. Liv Tyler has spoken about her experience filming The Strangers with unusual candor. She's described the psychological toll of spending weeks in a state of performed terror, of having to access genuine fear night after night. The shoot involved extended takes, sometimes lasting 10 or 15 minutes, in which Tyler had to maintain states of absolute panic. She said that some of those states weren't entirely performed, that the material and the isolated location and the masks worn by her tormentors combined to produce something that felt less like acting and more like survival. What's remarkable is that this psychological authenticity translates directly to the screen. Test audiences for The Strangers reported physical symptoms during screenings: elevated heart rates, sweating, difficulty breathing. Some audience members had to leave the theater. This wasn't the response to typical horror fare. This was something closer to a trauma response. The studio, Rogue Pictures, recognized that they had something unusual on their hands. Their marketing campaign leaned into the film's connection to real events, prominently featuring the tagline, "Inspired by true events," in all promotional material. That tagline is technically accurate. The film draws on the Manson murders, on Keddie, on Bertino's childhood experience, but it's also doing something sophisticated. It's not selling a horror movie. It's selling a documentary that happens to be staged. This approach had precedent. The Texas Chainsaw Massacre, released in 1974, was also marketed as being based on true events, when in fact its connection to reality was tenuous at best, loosely inspired by the crimes of Ed Gein, but mostly invented. This strategy worked because it changed how audiences processed what they were watching. A fictional film can be dismissed when the credits roll. A true film lingers. The Strangers did more than linger. It burrowed. In the years since its release, it has become one of the most cited films in discussions of home invasion anxiety. It appears in academic papers on horror cinema. It appears in psychological studies of fear responses. It appears, perhaps most disturbingly, in the testimonies of people who have experienced actual home invasions, survivors who describe their real trauma using the visual language of the film. This is the feedback loop we were discussing earlier, but seen from a different angle. The film didn't just draw from real violence, it became a framework for understanding real violence. When survivors try to articulate what happened to them, they reach for the images Bertino created: the mask, the standing silhouette, the figure watching from across the room. It was like The Strangers, they say, and everyone understands exactly what they mean. Criminologists use the term stranger homicide to describe murders in which the victim and offender have no prior relationship. These cases are relatively rare. Most murders involve people who know each other, but they're disproportionately terrifying to the public because they violate our basic assumptions about how violence works. We tell ourselves that murder has motives: jealousy, greed, revenge, drugs, money. If we can identify motives, we can avoid becoming victims. We can stay away from dangerous situations, dangerous people, dangerous choices. Stranger homicides destroy that illusion. They suggest that violence can strike anyone, anywhere, for no reason at all. That the most important factor in becoming a victim might simply be location, being in the wrong place at the wrong time, being home when the strangers arrive. Dr. James Allen Fox, a criminologist at Northeastern University who has studied homicide patterns for over 40 years, has documented the psychological impact of stranger violence on public perception. His research shows that Americans dramatically overestimate their likelihood of being killed by a stranger. In reality, you're far more likely to be murdered by someone you know, a family member, a friend, an acquaintance, than by a random attacker. But stranger violence dominates our fears because it represents chaos, unpredictability, the complete breakdown of cause and effect. This is what The Strangers taps into. This is why the film affected audiences so profoundly when it was released in 2008. It wasn't just a horror movie. It was an articulation of a very specific American anxiety that had been building since 1969, reinforced by unsolved cases like Keddie, amplified by every news report of a random attack or a home invasion gone wrong. The FBI's uniform crime reports tell a story that complicates our fears while simultaneously justifying them. Home invasions, burglaries that occur while residents are present, number approximately 1 million per year in the United States. The vast majority of these involve property crime with no physical violence. Burglars, as a rule, don't want confrontation. They want to get in, take what they can carry, and get out without being seen. But a subset of home invasions don't follow this pattern. A small percentage of offenders specifically seek occupied homes. They want the confrontation. They want the fear. For these offenders, the property crime is secondary or irrelevant. What they're really after is the experience of power, of control, of watching another human being realize that all the locks and alarms and precautions in the world won't save them. This is the category of offender depicted in The Strangers. This is what the Keddie killers appear to have been. This is the nightmare scenario that keeps homeowners awake at night, straining to hear sounds that don't belong. What makes this type of offender so difficult to understand is that they genuinely don't have conventional motives. When Susan Atkins said the Manson family chose the Tate house because it was convenient, she wasn't being evasive. She was being honest. The choice was essentially random. The victims could have been anyone. Forensic psychologists have attempted to construct profiles of motiveless home invaders, and what they've found is both specific and deeply unsettling. These offenders often describe feelings of invisibility in their daily lives, a sense that they don't matter, that they're not seen. The home invasion becomes a way of mattering, of forcing recognition. The victim's fear is proof of the offender's existence, their significance, their power. The masks in The Strangers serve this psychology perfectly. The killers aren't hiding their identities because they fear recognition. They're hiding their identities because their identities are irrelevant. What matters is the role they're playing, the archetype they're embodying. Anyone can wear the mask, anyone can become the stranger. But here's where the story becomes even more disturbing. Because The Strangers wasn't just influenced by real events, it emerged from a very personal experience that Bryan Bertino has recounted in multiple interviews. When Bertino was a child, he said he was around 10 or 11 years old. Strangers came to his family's door late at night. They knocked. They asked for someone who didn't live there. When Bertino's parents said they had the wrong house, the strangers left. The next morning, Bertino's family learned that several homes in their neighborhood had been burglarized that night. The strangers at the door had been checking which houses were empty. They were looking for easy targets. Bertino's family was spared because they were home, because someone answered the door. This experience, Bertino has said, never left him. The randomness of it, the way the strangers looked at the house before leaving, the knowledge that something terrible had happened nearby, and that the only thing separating his family from victimhood was chance. When he sat down to write The Strangers, he combined this childhood memory with everything he knew about the Manson murders, about Keddie, about stranger violence in America. He created a film that felt less like fiction and more like documentation, a record of something that had always been true, but that we had never been able to look at directly. The masks are important. In The Strangers, the three killers wear masks throughout the film. We never see their faces. We never learn their names. They are identified only as Man in the Mask, Dollface, and Pinup Girl. This anonymity isn't just a stylistic choice. It's thematically essential. The masks transform the killers from individuals into archetypes. They become stand-ins for every stranger who has ever made you uncomfortable, every knock at the door that made you hesitate before answering, every shadow that moved at the edge of your vision when you were home alone at night. This connects to something that psychologists call the uncanny, a concept developed by Sigmund Freud to describe the particular unease we feel when something familiar becomes strange. A face is familiar, a mask that resembles a face but isn't quite right. That's uncanny. It triggers a deep, almost primal discomfort that exists below the level of rational thought. The Manson family killers weren't masked. Neither were the perpetrators of the Keddie murders. But the decision to mask the killers in the strangers reflects something true about how we experience stranger violence. We don't see the faces of our fears. We see shapes, silhouettes, figures that could be anyone. The mask doesn't hide identity. It reveals the terrifying universality of the threat. What's particularly striking about the strangers is how accurately it depicts the psychology of home invasion victims. Research on trauma and home invasions shows that victims often experience a specific sequence of psychological responses. First, denial. This can't be happening. Then bargaining. If I cooperate, if I give them what they want, I'll survive. Then, as the violence continues and no logic seems to apply, a kind of dissociation, a feeling of watching the events from outside one's own body. Liv Tyler's performance as Kristen captures this progression with unsettling accuracy. We watch her move from confusion to fear, to bargaining to a kind of numb acceptance. We watch her try strategy after strategy, hiding, fighting, pleading, and we watch each strategy fail. The film forces us to confront the helplessness of being targeted by people who have no demands, no negotiating position, no off-ramp that leads to safety. This matches what survivors of random violence consistently report. The most traumatic aspect isn't always the physical harm, it's the meaninglessness. The human mind craves narrative, cause and effect, reasons. When violence has no reason, the mind can't process it. It becomes a wound that never fully heals because it can never be fully understood. The Keddie survivors have spoken about this in the decades since the murders. Sheila Sharp, who discovered the bodies, has described the way the unanswered questions have haunted her. Not just who did this, but why. What could possibly explain what happened in Cabin 28? What motive could justify that level of brutality, that extended presence, that deliberate cruelty? There is no satisfying answer. That's the point. That's what the strangers understood and what it had the courage to depict. Let's talk about something that doesn't get discussed enough. The role of rural isolation in American fear. The Strangers is set in a remote vacation home. The Keddie murders occurred in an isolated mountain community. The Tate murders happened in a house at the end of a long, private driveway. There's a pattern here, and it's not coincidental. America has always had a complicated relationship with isolation. The frontier mythology that shaped our national identity valorizes self-sufficiency, distance from neighbors, the freedom of open space. But that same mythology contains a shadow, the awareness that isolation also means vulnerability. If no one can hear you scream, screaming won't save you. The rural horror tradition in American film reflects this anxiety. From the Texas Chainsaw Massacre to Deliverance to The Hills Have Eyes, we have a long history of imagining the countryside as a place where the rules of civilization break down, where help is too far away to matter, where the people who live beyond the reach of society operate by different codes. The Strangers fits squarely in this tradition, but it updates it for a specific contemporary fear. The killers in the film aren't deformed cannibals or inbred mutants. They're just people. Young people, apparently. People who drive trucks and wear masks you could buy at any store. They could be your neighbors. They could be the strangers you pass on the highway. They could be anyone. This is what the film shares with the Keddie case. The suspects eventually named in that investigation weren't outsiders or monsters. They were local residents, people who lived nearby, who knew the area, who had probably passed Sue Sharp's family dozens of times. The violence didn't come from somewhere else.
It was already there, waiting, part of the community, all along. There's another dimension to the rural terror that The Strangers exploits, one that connects to broader patterns of American anxiety. It's the tension between the idea of retreat and the reality of exposure. Vacation homes, summer cabins, remote getaways. These are supposed to be escapes, places where the stress of everyday life falls away, places where you can leave your doors unlocked because you temporarily stepped outside the system of urban anxiety. James and Kristen go to the vacation home in The Strangers after a painful personal moment. His marriage proposal, her refusal. They're seeking refuge. They're seeking a place where they can process their emotions away from the demands of ordinary life. This is the cruelest irony the film exploits. The place of refuge becomes the trap. The isolation that promises peace delivers vulnerability. Every amenity of the vacation home, its remoteness, its privacy, its distance from neighbors, becomes an advantage for the killer, an obstacle to survival. The same dynamic operated in the Keddie case. The resort was affordable precisely because it was remote, precisely because it lacked the amenities and security of more developed areas. Sue Sharp moved there to escape an abusive marriage, to find safety for herself and her children. The isolation that was supposed to protect her family made them targets instead. This pattern appears repeatedly in documented home invasion cases. Criminals specifically target isolated properties because isolation provides cover. The same factors that homeowners value, privacy, distance from neighbors, lack of through traffic, make those homes attractive to offenders who don't want witnesses. After The Strangers was released in 2008, something interesting happened. The film was a commercial success, grossing over $82 million worldwide against a budget of $9 million. But more significantly, it seemed to touch a nerve that went beyond typical horror movie appreciation. Online discussions of the film frequently turned to real-life experiences. People shared stories of strangers knocking on their doors at odd hours. They described the feeling of being watched, of sensing a presence outside their windows, waking in the night certain that someone was in the house. The film had given them permission to articulate fears they'd been carrying silently. This phenomenon, where a fictional work becomes a vessel for real anxiety, tells us something important about The Strangers and about the true events that inspired it. We needed this movie. We needed something that would make visible the formless dread that had been accumulating since 1969, since Keddie, since every news report of random violence that confirmed our worst suspicions about the world. There's a term in psychology for what The Strangers provides: symbolic containment. When we're afraid of something too large or too formless to confront directly, we sometimes find relief by encountering that fear in controlled symbolic form. A horror movie about our deepest terrors is paradoxically comforting because it gives shape to the shapeless, because it provides a narrative arc to fears that otherwise have no beginning, middle, or end. This is why horror as a genre has persisted across every human culture. We tell scary stories because scary stories help us process fears that would otherwise overwhelm us. The monster under the bed becomes bearable when we can describe it, when we can give it rules, when we can imagine, even falsely, that there are ways to defeat it. The Strangers offers no such reassurance. The killers cannot be reasoned with. They cannot be escaped through cleverness or courage. They cannot be killed. In the film's final moments, we learn that the victim's resistance was futile, that the killers walked away unharmed to do this again, another night. The film refuses the catharsis that horror usually provides, and yet audiences kept watching, keep watching. Even now, the film has become a touchstone, a reference point, a cultural shorthand for this particular flavor of fear. To describe something as like The Strangers is to invoke an entire complex of anxieties without having to name them individually. The Strangers, Prey at Night was released in 2018, a decade after the original. It expanded the mythology, introduced new victims, gave the killers a preferred hunting ground, trailer parks and rural vacation spots. The same masks appeared, the same motiveless cruelty, the same refusal to explain why. What's notable about the sequel is how it engaged with the legacy of its predecessor. The film includes extended sequences set to pop music from the 1980s, specifically Bonnie Tyler's Total Eclipse of the Heart and Kim Wilde's Kids in America. The music creates a strange temporal dislocation, connecting the contemporary violence to something from the past, suggesting that these killers, or killers like them, have always been with us. This connects to something criminologists have documented about serial and spree offenders. Many don't experience their crimes as isolated incidents. They experience them as ongoing projects, as expressions of a persistent identity. They see themselves as part of a lineage, connected to previous offenders, whose work they're continuing or improving upon. The Manson family saw themselves as soldiers in a coming race war. Other killers have modeled themselves on predecessors they admired, studying their methods, their psychology, their mistakes. Violence becomes a tradition, passed down not through genetics, but through cultural transmission, through news reports, through films, through the collective memory of horror. This brings us to something uncomfortable, something we need to acknowledge about films like The Strangers and about the true crimes that inspire them. There's a feedback loop here. Real violence inspires fictional depictions. Fictional depictions shape public perception. Public perception influences how we understand and respond to real violence. And occasionally, rarely but not never, fictional depictions inspire real violence in turn. Criminologists have studied this phenomenon extensively, and the consensus is nuanced. Most people who watch violent films don't become violent. The overwhelming majority of horror fans are perfectly normal, well-adjusted individuals who enjoy the thrill of safe fear. But for a small subset of already disturbed individuals, violent media can provide templates, techniques, and justifications for acting on impulses they already possessed. This isn't an argument against horror films. It's an observation about the world we live in. The Strangers doesn't create fear. It reflects fear that already exists. It doesn't cause violence. It documents a pattern of violence that has been part of American life for generations. To blame the film for what it depicts would be to mistake the messenger for the message. But we should be clear about what we're doing when we watch a film like this. We're engaging with real pain. We're processing real trauma. We're looking at something true about human nature and hoping that looking at it clearly will help us understand it, survive it, maybe even prevent it. The survivors of the Keddie murders have had complicated relationships with the various media depictions of the case. Some have appreciated the attention, hoping that continued public interest will keep pressure on investigators to find answers. Others have found the coverage exploitative, a constant reopening of wounds that have never fully healed. This tension between the public's need to understand and the private need to move on exists in every true crime story. It exists in every horror film that takes its inspiration from real events. There's no clean resolution to it, no way to tell these stories that doesn't cause some harm to someone. What we can do is tell them honestly. What we can do is acknowledge the real people behind the fiction, the real pain that made these narratives possible. What we can do is remember that because you were home wasn't just a movie line. It was an answer given by real killers explaining why real people died. In the years since The Strangers was released, something has shifted in American culture. Home security has become a multi-billion-dollar industry. Ring doorbells and security cameras have proliferated to the point where they're now standard features of suburban life. The footage these devices capture, strangers on porches, figures moving at the edge of frame, faces illuminated by infrared at 2 a.m, has created an entirely new genre of viral content. Scroll through social media on any given night, and you'll find dozens of these videos. Most show nothing remarkable. Delivery drivers, neighbors walking dogs, wildlife investigating unfamiliar territory. But some show something else. Figures who approach houses and then retreat. People who knock and wait and knock again. Shadows that seem to be testing, probing, looking for something. Are these would-be intruders? Innocent people caught in an unflattering footage?
We rarely know. The ambiguity is the point. Each video becomes a Rorschach test for our anxieties, a confirmation of whatever we already believed about the dangers lurking outside our doors. The strangers anticipated this surveillance culture before it fully emerged. The film includes a scene in which Kristen sees one of the masked women standing in the backyard, visible only briefly before disappearing. It's exactly the kind of image that now circulates endlessly online. The unexplained figure, the ambiguous threat, the suggestion that something is out there even if we can't quite see it clearly. Bryan Bertino couldn't have known in 2001 when he wrote the script that his film would feel even more relevant 20 years later. He was drawing on fears that existed in the pre-digital age, fears rooted in the Manson murders, in Keddie, in his own childhood. But those fears have only intensified as our ability to monitor our surroundings has increased. Every new security camera reminds us that there's something to be secured against. If you've watched The Strangers, if you felt that particular dread it evokes, the sense that something is watching you from the darkness, you've touched something real. You've connected to an anxiety that has been part of American life for over 50 years, since the Manson murders made us realize that our homes might not protect us, since the Keddie case showed us what happens when violence stays to admire its own work. The next time you're home alone and you hear a knock at the door, you'll feel it. That hesitation, that primitive calculation. Should I answer? Is it safe? Who could possibly be out there at this hour? That feeling isn't irrational. It isn't paranoia. It's your mind doing exactly what it evolved to do. Recognizing a threat pattern, remembering the stories, keeping you alive. The Strangers understood this. Bryan Bertino understood this. The film doesn't need to exaggerate or invent. Reality is horrible enough. The true story behind the masks is that there is no story, no explanation, no motive that makes sense. Just violence that comes when it comes to whoever happens to be home. In the film's final moments, the three masked killers leave. They drive away from the crime scene, passing a car full of young people who stare at their masks with confusion. One of the young people in the passing car, two boys distributing religious pamphlets, will later find the victims. The killers know this. They pass them deliberately, flaunting their anonymity, daring anyone to recognize them for what they are. Then they disappear, back into America, back into the vast, untrackable population of strangers who surround us every day. They could be anywhere. They could be anyone. That's the true horror, not the masks, not the violence. The knowledge that the strangers are always out there, and that the only thing separating you from their attention is chance, proximity, the simple fact of being home. In 1969, members of the Manson family selected their victims based on convenience. In 1981, killers entered cabin 28 for reasons we may never fully understand. In 2008, Bryan Bertino made a film that synthesized these events into something that felt, for many viewers, like a premonition, a warning about a danger they'd always sensed, but never been able to name. The official position is that The Strangers is a work of fiction inspired by true events, but fundamentally invented. The safer interpretation is that it's entertainment, a horror movie designed to thrill and disturb before the credits roll and normal life resumes. But you know better now. You know about Keddie. You know about the Manson connection. You know about the childhood memory that planted itself in Bryan Bertino's mind and refused to let go. Some stories are too true to be fiction. Some fears are too real to be invented. And some strangers have always been out there, waiting for a house, with a light on, waiting for someone to be home. Lock your doors tonight, not because it will save you. The Sharp's door was locked too, but because the ritual might help you sleep. Check your windows. Listen for sounds that don't belong. And if someone knocks at your door late at night, asking for someone who doesn't live there, ask yourself, why this house? Why this moment? Why me? The answer might be simpler and more terrible than anything you could imagine, because you were home.